The pickup truck ground to a stop at the final checkpoint, engine ticking in the frozen silence. Catherine Hayes rolled down her window, and the blast of sub-zero air hit her face like a slap. -8 Celsius. Maybe colder with the wind chill cutting down from the ridgeline. Her breath crystallized a moment it left her lips. "Mrs. Hayes?" The young specialist's voice cracked on the cold. His M4A1 hung loose across his chest, safety on, muzzle angled toward the dirt. Trigger discipline poor. 2 seconds to bring it up if contact came screaming through the wire. Maybe 3 in this cold, when fingers were numb inside the gloves. She smiled. "That's me. Welcome to FOB Granite, ma'am. Your husband's waiting at the command trailer." Catherine nodded, put the truck in gear, and drove through the gate. In her rear-view mirror, the specialist was already turning back to the warmth of the guard shack, stamping his boots against the frozen ground. He never checked her credentials beyond the name, never ran her plates, never asked what was in the duffel bag in the back seat. FOB Granite unfolded before her in shades of gray and white, prefab structures half buried under snowdrifts, a fuel depot with ice creeping up the tanks, 2 Humvees in the motor pool, one missing its rear driver's side tire, a command trailer with frost climbing the windows, a supply shed leaning against its own weight, an aid station that looked like it hadn't seen a resupply in 6 weeks, 23 structures, 12 permanent, 11 temporary, 1 generator coughing black smoke into the pale winter sky. Catherine's eyes moved without her permission. She noted the perimeter fence. Chain link, 8 feet, no razor wire on the northern section where the snow had drifted high enough to climb. She noted the guard towers, 2 manned, 1 empty. The eastern tower spotlight cracked and dark. She noted the communications array. Primary satellite dish angled toward the southern horizon. Backup radio mast listing 11 degrees starboard. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more real stories of courage, and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to FOB Granite, where Catherine Hayes was about to see something that made her blood run cold. She parked the truck outside the command trailer and killed the engine. For a long moment, she sat there, hands on the wheel, watching the base move around her. Soldiers in cold weather gear trudging between buildings. A sergeant barking orders near the motor pool. 2 privates arguing over a broken heater outside the mess hall. 27 souls. Maybe 28 if someone was in the aid station. She counted them without thinking, the way she counted exits in restaurants, the way she calculated sight lines in parking lots, the way she measured the distance between her husband's heartbeat and the sound of his voice. Old habits. Dead habits. The door of the command trailer swung open, and Captain David Hayes stepped out into the cold. He was 41 years old, 6'2", with shoulders built for carrying weight that wasn't measured in pounds. His uniform was immaculate despite the conditions. His boots were polished despite the snow. His face split into a grin the moment he saw her. "Cat," he said it like a prayer, "you're 3 days early." Catherine climbed out of the truck and walked into his arms. He smelled like coffee and cold and the faint chemical bite of MRE heating elements. He smelled like home, even here, even in this frozen nowhere. "Couldn't wait," she said into his chest. David laughed, and the sound was warm against the bitter wind. "You drove 6 hours through a mountain pass in January because you couldn't wait 3 days? The pass wasn't that bad. The pass closed 2 hours after you came through. Weather Service is calling for a blizzard by nightfall." Catherine pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "Then I guess I'm stuck here with you." "I guess you are." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "Come on, I'll give you the grand tour." The tour took 47 minutes. Catherine saw everything. The mess hall with its dented aluminum tables and the coffee maker that only worked on Tuesdays. The aid station with its single combat medic, a staff sergeant named Reyes who had kind eyes and steady hands. The motor pool where Sergeant First Class Morrison was teaching a private how to patch a radiator hose with duct tape and profanity. The supply shed where 3 months of MREs were stacked next to ammunition crates and broken equipment, waiting for a resupply that might never come. And the command trailer, where the radio console hummed with static and the satellite link blinked red every 30 seconds. "Primary comms have been spotty for 2 weeks," David said, tapping the console. Satellite angle's bad this time of year. We got a backup relay station 12 miles east, but the road's been buried since the last storm. Catherine studied the console. The encryption module was outdated. The frequency hopping pattern was predictable. The backup battery showed 63% charge, not enough for sustained operations if the generator failed. What about the motion sensors on the perimeter? David looked at her strangely. What about them? I noticed 3 of them looked cracked. Northern section, near where the snows drifted against the fence. They've been down for a week, waiting on replacement parts. He tilted his head. Since when do you know what motion sensors look like? Catherine shrugged. I watch a lot of documentaries. David laughed again, but there was something in his eyes. A question he didn't ask. A door he didn't open. She changed the subject. Show me where I'm sleeping. The officers' quarters were a converted shipping container with foam insulation and a space heater that rattled like a dying man's cough. There was a cot, a footlocker, and a photograph of their wedding day taped to the wall. Catherine sat on the cot and listened to the wind howl against the metal walls. David sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You okay? You seem distracted. Just tired from the drive? You sure? He reached over and took her hand. You've been different lately. Quieter. I see you sometimes, staring out the window at nothing. And the way you just walked through this base, he hesitated. You were cataloging it, Cat. I saw it, like you were looking for something. Catherine's throat tightened. 8 years. 8 years of carefully constructed normalcy. 8 years of dinner conversations and Sunday brunches, and pretending that the woman who killed 143 people was the same woman who argued about throw pillows and forgot to buy milk. I'm fine, she said. Really? David studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded, kissed her knuckles, and stood up. I've got a briefing in 20 minutes. You want to grab some coffee? Meet me in the mess hall after? Sounds perfect. He left, and Catherine sat alone in the cold metal box, listening to the wind. She hadn't told him why she'd moved her trip up 3 days. She hadn't told him about the intelligence reports she still had access to, contacts from her former life who owed her favors, analysts who respected what she'd done, and didn't ask why she still wanted to know. She hadn't told him about the irregular activities she'd spotted in the regional summaries, unusual movement patterns, communication intercepts that didn't match known insurgent protocols, something professional, something coordinated, something that smelled like a planned assault. She'd driven 6 hours through a mountain pass because her gut, the same gut that kept her alive through 3 deployments, through the Second Battle of Fallujah, through 143 moments of absolute stillness followed by absolute violence, told her something was wrong. And her gut was never wrong. Catherine stood and walked a window. The snow was falling harder now, visibility dropping to 100 yards, then 50. The wind changed direction, coming down from the north ridge like a predator testing the air. She traced a ridgeline with her eyes. Elevation. Cover. Clear sight lines to every structure on the base. Perfect overwatch position. If she were planning an assault, she stopped the thought. Killed it before it could grow. That wasn't her anymore. She'd made a choice 8 years ago, standing in a hospital room in Germany with 17 dead civilians on her conscience and a resignation letter in her hand. She looked in the mirror and seen something that scared her. Not the blood on her hands, but the absence of it. The way the killing came so easily. The way she could take a life at 600 yards and feel nothing but the faint satisfaction of a clean shot. She'd left the Corps because she was afraid of what she was becoming. She'd buried Catherine the sniper so deep that sometimes she forgot she'd ever existed at all. But FOB Granite wasn't letting her forget. The mess hall was half full when she arrived. Soldiers hunched over plastic trays, eating food that had been designed for nutrition rather than taste. The coffee maker, miraculously functional despite the day of the week, produced something that approximated caffeine, if not flavor. Catherine filled a cup, found a table in the corner, and sat with her back to the wall. Old habits. A young corporal approached her table. His name tape read Jenkins. He was maybe 22, with the eager eyes of someone who hadn't seen real combat yet. You're the captain's wife, right? Mrs. Hayes. Just Catherine. Mind if I sit down? I don't mean to bother you, ma'am. It's just, we don't get many visitors out here, especially not in winter. Catherine gestured to the seat across from her. Jenkins sat down with his tray and immediately began talking. He told her about his hometown in Ohio, his girlfriend who was waiting for him, his plans to propose when he got home in 4 months. He told her about the boredom of FOB Granite, the endless monotony of watching snowfall on snow, the way time seemed to freeze along with everything else. Catherine listened. She asked questions. She laughed at his jokes and sympathized with his complaints, and played the role of the captain's wife, who was exactly what she appeared to be. But part of her was somewhere else entirely. Part of her was counting the seconds between the wind gusts against the mess hall windows. Part of her was noting the position of every soldier in the room and calculating how long it would take them to reach their weapons if the walls came down. Part of her was running scenarios, breach points, defensive positions, evacuation routes, the way a normal person might run through a grocery list. 17 dead. 1 decision. 1 moment of hesitation. The man in Fallujah had been standing in a doorway, his daughter held against his chest like a shield. Catherine had him in her scope. Clear shot to the head. 812 yards. Wind from the southwest at 6 miles per hour. Elevation adjusted. Breathing controlled. She hadn't taken the shot. She couldn't kill a man in front of his daughter. Couldn't make a child watch her father's skull fragment into red mist. Couldn't live with that image, even if the alternative was worse. The man had walked away. 1 week later, he drove a truck packed with explosives into a crowded marketplace. 17 dead, 43 wounded, 11 of them children. Catherine had never learned what happened to the daughter. So anyway, that's why we call him Sparky. Mrs. Hayes? You okay? Catherine blinked. Jenkins was staring at her, concern creasing his young face. Sorry, drifted off for a second. She smiled, and the smile felt like a mask. You were saying? Just that the generator's been acting up. Sergeant Morrison says it's got maybe another month before it dies for good. That's concerning. Yeah, but what isn't out here? Jenkins laughed. This whole base is held together with duct tape and prayers. Catherine's eyes drifted to the window. The snow was falling sideways now, driven by winds that had to be pushing 15 miles per hour. The visibility had collapsed to maybe 40 yards. Beyond that, the world was white static, perfect cover for an approach. She excused herself from Jenkins with a promise to have dinner with him and the other soldiers later. Outside, the cold hit her like a physical force. She pulled her jacket tighter and walked the perimeter of the base, her boots crunching to the frozen crust of yesterday's snow. The northern fence was worse than she'd thought. 3 sections where the chain link had buckled under the weight of accumulated ice. 2 motion sensors with cracked housings, their wiring exposed to the elements. 1 section where the snow had drifted so high that a determined man could climb over without touching the fence at all. The guard tower overlooking the approach was manned by a single soldier with a thermal scope and a heater that glowed red in the gathering darkness. He waved at her as she passed. She waved back. 180 degrees of exposure. No overlapping fields of fire. Response time from the main compound, 45 seconds minimum. Catherine climbed a small rise near the motor pool and turned to face north. The ridgeline was invisible in the storm, but she could feel it there, a presence, a weight, 1,000 yards of perfect firing positions looking down at a base that had no idea how vulnerable it was. If she were planning this assault, she would stage on that ridge. Multiple fire teams spread across the elevation, using the natural folds in the terrain for concealment. A machine gun positioned to suppress the compound while the assault element breached the perimeter. Drones for reconnaissance and smoke deployment. Mortars for softening targets once the breach was complete. She would hit them at midday when the sun was at its peak and shadows were minimal. She would jam their communications first, then blind their sensors, then collapse the perimeter from north to south, driving the defenders into a kill box near the fuel depot. It would take 12 minutes to overrun FOB Granite, maybe 15 if the defenders fought hard. Catherine closed her eyes. Snow gathered on her eyelashes, melted against the warmth of her skin. Stop thinking like this. But she couldn't stop. She'd never been able to stop. That was the curse of being what she was. The inability to look at any situation without calculating threat vectors, without measuring distances, without running the math that turned chaos into clean equations of violence. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from David. Briefing running late. Meet me at 1800? She typed back, "Take your time. I'm exploring." His response came immediately. "Don't get lost in the snow. Love you." She stared at the words on the screen. Love you. Such simple words. Such complicated weight. David Hayes had married a woman named Catherine, a civilian, a former something or other who'd left the military for vague reasons she never discussed. He knew she'd been enlisted. He knew she'd done multiple deployments. He knew she had nightmares sometimes, dreams that woke her gasping and shaking, that she dismissed as just stress. He didn't know about the 143 confirmed kills. He didn't know she'd been one of fewer than 300 active duty scout snipers in the entire Marine Corps. He didn't know she'd trained 2 generations of shooters at Stone Bay, that her techniques were still taught in curriculum, that men who'd never met her called her Ghost because of how she moved through the mountains of Afghanistan. He didn't know about Fallujah. Catherine put the phone away and resumed her walk. She checked the eastern approach, the southern gate, the western fuel depot with its inadequate fire suppression systems. She mapped every blind spot, every vulnerability, every possible breach point. By the time she returned to the officers' quarters, she could have drawn the base from memory, every structure, every defensive position, every critical failure point. The duffel bag was still in the backseat of her truck where she'd left it. She retrieved it and carried it inside, setting it on the footlocker at the end of the cot. Inside were clothes, toiletries, a paperback novel she had no intention of reading. And beneath all of it, wrapped in an old sweatshirt, was a compact spotting scope and a portable weather station, just in case. She didn't sleep that night. The wind shrieked against the walls of the shipping container, a sound like screaming that never stopped. David came to her at 1900 hours, exhausted from his briefing, and fell asleep with his arms around her. She lay in the darkness and listened to his breathing, counted the rhythm of his heart against her back, and tried to remember what it felt like to be normal. At 0347, she slipped out of bed without waking him. She pulled on her cold weather gear and stepped outside into the storm. The base was silent except for the wind. The guard towers were manned, their spotlights cutting weak yellow circles through the blowing snow. She climbed the same rise near the motor pool and looked north. The ridge line was still invisible, buried in darkness and weather, but she could feel something out there, something watching. The barometric pressure had been dropping all day. The storm was going to get worse before it got better. And something about the timing, the comms failures, the broken sensors, the isolated position, made her skin crawl with recognition. This is how it starts, she thought. This is how they set the stage. She stood in the cold for 23 minutes, watching nothing, feeling everything. Then she went back inside, climbed into bed beside her husband, and closed her eyes. Dawn came gray and heavy, the sun struggling to break through the cloud cover. Catherine was up before David, brewing coffee on the small electric kettle in the quarters. He woke to the smell and smiled at her with eyes still soft from sleep. Couldn't sleep? Just eager to see you, she lied. They had breakfast together in the mess hall. Powdered eggs. Coffee that tasted like disappointment. Toast that had been frozen, thawed, and frozen again at some point in its journey from Kansas to this forgotten corner of the world. David talked about supply requests and personnel rotations, and the endless paperwork that came with commanding even a small post like FOB Granite. Catherine listened with half her attention. The other half was tracking movement outside the windows, soldiers beginning their daily routines, patrols gearing up, the motor pool coming to life with the cough and grumble of cold engines. Everything looked normal. Everything felt wrong. At 0930 hours, she excused herself to stretch her legs. David kissed her cheek and returned to his paperwork. Catherine walked the perimeter again, checking the same points she'd checked the night before. The northern fence was unchanged. The guard towers were fully manned now. The visibility had improved slightly, maybe 100 yards in the intervals between gusts. She found herself standing near the motor pool, watching Sergeant First Class Morrison curse at the engine of a Humvee. He was a thick man with mechanic's hands and a vocabulary that could strip paint. "Morning, ma'am," he said without looking up. "Don't suppose you know anything about distributor caps?" "Not much," Catherine admitted. "What's wrong with it?" "Same thing that's wrong with everything on this base. It's old, it's cold, and nobody's sending us what we need to fix it." He wiped his hands on a rag that was already black with grease. Between you and me, Mrs. Hayes, this whole operation's held together with duct tape and prayers? Morrison laughed. You've been talking to Jenkins. He's a talker. That he is. Morrison leaned against the Humvee and studied her with careful eyes. You seem pretty comfortable around military hardware, ma'am. Most civilian spouses get a little wide-eyed at all the guns and gear. Catherine shrugged. I've been around bases before. Hum. Morrison's eyes didn't leave her face. No offense, ma'am, but there's something about the way you move, the way you watch things. You've got eyes that don't miss much. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. He pushed off the Humvee and reached for his toolkit. Let me know if you need anything, Mrs. Hayes. And maybe, I don't know, maybe stay close to cover today. Weather's supposed to get worse. Catherine watched him return to his work. He knew, not specifically, not the details, but he knew something. Men like Morrison, career NCOs who'd survived multiple deployments, developed a sense for people who'd seen the same things they'd seen. He recognized something in her that she'd spent 8 years trying to bury. She returned to the officer's quarters and retrieved her spotting scope. She told herself it was just curiosity, just an old habit that didn't mean anything. She climbed the rise behind the motor pool and extended the scope, scanning the northern ridge line in the brief windows when the weather cleared. Nothing. Trees and snow and rock and silence. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The pressure behind her eyes, the weight in her chest, the old familiar certainty that something was coming, and she was the only one who could see it. At 1,200 hours, she ate lunch with David in his office. Sandwiches and chips and a chocolate bar he'd been saving for a special occasion. You know what I love about you, he said, unwrapping the chocolate. You're the most low-maintenance woman I've ever met. Most wives will complain about the conditions out here. You just adapt. I've always been adaptable. That you have. He broke the chocolate in half and offered her the larger piece. 8 years, Kat. 8 years of marriage. And sometimes I feel like I still don't know you. Like there are parts of you that you keep locked away somewhere I can't reach. Catherine took the chocolate. Her throat tightened. Everybody has parts of themselves they keep private, she said. I know. He hesitated. I want you to know that whatever it is, whatever you're not telling me, it doesn't change anything. I love you. All of you, even the parts you're afraid to show me. She wanted to tell him. In that moment, with the chocolate melting on her tongue and his eyes full of trust and love, she wanted to open her mouth and let the truth spill out. I killed 143 people. I was one of the best snipers in the Marine Corps. I left because I was afraid I was becoming a monster. I moved our trip up because I think this base is about to be attacked, and I couldn't let you die without... I love you too, she said instead. All of you. The first explosion hit at 1,340 hours. Catherine was in the latrine when it happened. A flat, heavy whump that she felt in her chest before she heard it. The lights flickered. The walls shook. And then the second explosion came, closer, louder, a sound like the world cracking open. She was moving before she knew she was moving. Out the door, across the compound, eyes scanning, body low, mind running calculations she hadn't accessed in 8 years. Breach in the northern perimeter. 2 explosions, shaped charges, probably IEDs or RPGs. Entry point near the section where the fence was weakest. Smoke was pouring from the guard tower on the eastern side. The spotlight was dark. Someone was screaming. A third explosion hit the motor pool, and one of the Humvees erupted in a pillar of fire and twisted metal. Sergeant Morrison was on the ground, crawling away from flames, his left arm hanging at an angle that meant it was broken or worse. Catherine ran to him, grabbed him by the collar of his jacket, and dragged him toward the cover of a concrete barrier. He was shouting something, but the ringing in her ears drowned out the words. The smoke was everywhere now, not just from the explosions, but from above. She looked up and saw them. 3 quadcopter drones hovering 40 feet overhead, each one trailing thick clouds of white smoke that obscured everything. They're blinding us, taking away our visual. Professional tactics. This is an insurgent raid. Where's the captain? She screamed into Morrison's ear. Command trailer. The machine gun opened up. Catherine had heard that sound before, the heavy, rhythmic hammering of a belt-fed weapon laying down suppressive fire. This one was firing from the north ridge. maybe 400 yards out, the rounds chewing through the prefab structures like they were made of cardboard. She watched a line of bullets walk across the supply shed, punching holes the size of her fist through the aluminum walls. Everyone was down. 27 soldiers pressed flat against the frozen ground, pinned behind whatever cover they could find. Concrete barriers, Humvees, the corners of buildings. Some of them were returning fire, but they were shooting blind into the smoke, their rounds disappearing into the white with no effect. Catherine moved along the barrier, staying low, until she reached the corner of the command trailer. The door was open. Inside, she could see the radio console sparking and dead, the satellite dish visible through the shattered window. It had been hit by the first explosion. Primary comms were gone. David was crouched behind his desk, a sidearm in his hand, shouting into a backup radio that crackled with static. Granted actual to any station. Priority flash. We are under coordinated assault. Primary comms down. Requesting immediate QRF. Static. Nothing but static. They're jamming us, Catherine said. David's head snapped toward her. His face was white beneath the soot and cold. Cat, what are you? You need to get a cover. The relay station. 12 miles east. Can we reach it? Roads buried. Even if it wasn't. Another burst from the machine gun cut him off, rounds slamming into the trailer's exterior wall. Even if it wasn't, they've got the high ground. Anyone who tries to move toward the gate is going to get cut down. The firing paused. In the silence, Catherine heard voices, shouted commands in a language she didn't recognize. The crunch of boots on snow, the whine of drone motors repositioning overhead. They were repositioning, collapsing the perimeter, driving the defenders toward the fuel depot. How many casualties? She asked. I don't know. At least 3 down, maybe more. How many shooters on the ridge? David stared at her. What? How many shooters? I counted 1 machine gun position, but there have to be rifle teams. I saw muzzle flashes from at least 2 different elevations. They've got the high ground in a half-moon formation, probably 8 to 12 shooters covering a 120-degree arc. Cat, how do you? David. She grabbed his arm, forced him to look at her. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago. But right now, there's no time. Right now, I need you to trust me. I trust you. Where's the armory? Behind the mess hall, but it's locked. What weapons you have in there? Standard loadout. M4S, M249S, Summit 4s. Any precision rifles? M24S? M110S? David's face changed. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. There's an M110 in the supply shed. It's stripped. Someone cannibalized the scope and forward rail for parts, but the action's still good. What about optics? Anything mounted? There might be a Leupold in the storage cage. It's an older model, fixed magnification. 10 power? I think so, yes. Cat, where you planning? The machine gun opened up again, longer this time. The sustained burst of someone burning through a belt without concern for ammunition. They had supplies. They had time. They were methodical. I'm planning to end this, Catherine said. She didn't wait for his response. She moved through the smoke, staying below the sight lines on the ridge, using the burning Humvee as concealment. The supply shed was 30 yards away, its aluminum walls perforated with bullet holes, but still standing. She reached the door, found it padlocked, and kicked it in with a heel strike that would have made her old instructor proud. Inside, chaos. MRE boxes scattered across the floor. Ammunition crates stacked against the walls. And there, on a metal rack near the back, the stripped skeleton of an M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle. She picked it up, checked the action, checked the chamber. The rifle had been abused, stock scuffed, barrel cold but clean, magazine missing. She found a box of 7.62 by 51 millimeters NATO rounds on a nearby shelf and a 20-round magazine stuffed behind a crate of medical supplies. The scope was in a locked cage at the back of the shed. She broke the lock with a length of rebar, retrieved a Leupold Mark V, and mounted it on the rifle's remaining rail. Fixed 10 power magnification. Not optimal for the range she'd need, but functional. She loaded the magazine. 20 rounds. Checked the chamber. Brass gleaming in the dim light. For 8 years, she'd told herself she wasn't this person anymore. For 8 years, she'd buried Catherine the sniper beneath layers of normalcy and denial. But the moment her hands touched the rifle, the moment her fingers found familiar positions, she knew the truth. She'd never stopped being this person. She'd only stopped admitting it. Catherine moved to the southern edge of the compound. Staying low, the rifle cradled against her chest. The smoke from the drones was thinning. They were conserving payload, deploying in bursts to maintain confusion without exhausting their supply. Smart tactics, controlled aggression. The south ridge rose 400 feet above the base, a steep climb through snow and scree that would take 20 minutes under normal conditions. In this weather, in this cold, with an assault in progress, maybe 25. She found Morrison where she'd left him, propped against a concrete barrier, his broken arm strapped to his chest with his own belt. His face was gray with pain, but his eyes were clear. "Mrs. Hayes, you shouldn't be." He saw the rifle. His mouth opened, closed, open again. "Holy SH, I need you to do something for me, Sergeant. I need you to tell my husband that I'm sorry I didn't tell him sooner. And I need you to keep these men alive until I get back." "Ma'am, who the hell are you?" Catherine smiled. It was not a warm smile. "I'm the woman who's going to kill everyone on that ridge." She moved before he could respond, slipping through a gap in the southern fence that she'd identified during her perimeter walk the night before. The ground rose sharply, rock and snow and ice that cut through her gloves and froze against her skin. She climbed in silence, the rifle across her back, her breath controlled despite the exertion. 400 feet of elevation gain. 17 minutes of climbing. She found a shelf of rock near the crest, a natural platform that offered clear sight lines to the northern ridge. She set up her position, prone, rifle extended, scope to her eye. The northern ridge materialized through the glass. 600 yards, maybe 630 to the farthest position. Wind from the northwest at 15 to 17 miles per hour, gusting higher. Temperature -8 Celsius. Barometric pressure dropping. The math scrolled through her mind like ticker tape. She found the machine gun first. Belt fed, probably a PCAM or similar, positioned in a natural depression that offered cover from below, but exposed the operator's right flank. The shooter was a large man in winter camouflage, his face hidden behind a balaclava, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Catherine adjusted her scope. Elevation plus 3 MOA. Windage 1.5 MOA left. She steadied her breathing, found the space between heartbeats, and placed her crosshairs on the machine gunner's center mass. Distance, 612 yards. She exhaled. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The round crossed a valley in 1.2 seconds. The machine gunner's chest erupted in red mist, and he collapsed backward into the snow. The sound reached her a moment later, the flat crack of the supersonic round echoing off the ridgelines. Below, in the compound, someone shouted. Catherine worked the action, chambered a fresh round, and found her next target. Rifle team, for men in winter camo, positioned 20 yards downslope from the machine gun nest. They were scrambling now, trying to locate the source of shot, their heads swiveling in panic. She picked the one on the left, the one who was pointing toward her position, who had figured out where the shot came from, who was about to warn the others. 618 yards. Windage adjusted for the gust. Breathing controlled. She fired. The man spun and fell. 3 left. She chambered another round, found a third target, a shooter with an RPG balanced on his shoulder, turned to aim at the compound below, and put a round through his spine before he could fire. 2 left. One of them was running now, abandoning his position, sprinting down the ridge toward the tree lean. The other was prone behind a boulder, invisible except for the muzzle of his rifle. Catherine let the runner go. He was a problem for later. She focused on the one behind the boulder, waiting for him to move, counting the seconds between his panicked breaths. He raised his head. 1 inch. 2 inches. She fired. The round took him in the throat. For confirmed kills. 3 rounds remaining in the mental tally she was keeping. Somewhere on that ridge, there were more shooters. The rifle team she'd identified earlier, the ones who'd been firing from multiple elevations. She scanned left, found a cluster of muzzle flashes, maybe 625 yards out. 2 shooters trading fire with the compound below, unaware that their overwatch was gone. Catherine adjusted her position, found her angle, and waited for a clear shot. The first shooter raised his head to aim. She put a round through his skull. 5 confirmed. The second shooter panicked, broke cover, tried to run. Catherine tracked him, led him by half a body length, and squeezed the trigger. Mississippi. The round kicked up snow 3 feet to his right. She chambered another round, adjusted, fired again. The shooter dropped. 6 confirmed. 8 rounds fired. 1 miss. The ridge fell silent. Catherine scanned left to right, searching for movement, searching for targets. She found one more, a figure in white camouflage crawling through the snow toward the tree line, dragging what looked like a radio. The radio operator, the one coordinating the assault. 630 yards. Maximum effective range for the M110 in these conditions. The wind was gusting harder now, 19 miles per hour at least, pushing her holdover calculations to their limits. She steadied herself, found the rhythm of her breathing, placed the crosshairs just ahead of the crawling figure, accounting for movement and wind and the terrible mathematics of killing. She fired. The figure stopped moving. 7 confirmed. 9 rounds total. 1 miss. Acceptable ratio. Catherine lay still on the frozen rock, her cheek pressed against the stock, her eyes still locked to the scope. The compound below was a chaos of movement. Soldiers advancing on the northern fence, medics rushing toward the wounded, someone shouting orders into a radio that might finally be working. The assault had collapsed. Without overwatch, without radio coordination, the remaining attackers had no command structure. They were fleeing into the storm, disappearing into the white like ghosts. She watched them go. Her crosshairs tracked their movement, but she didn't fire. They were broken, running, no longer a threat. And somewhere deep inside her, in a place she tried to bury beneath 8 years of civilian life, something that might have been mercy stayed her finger on the trigger. The climb down took longer than the climb up. Her muscles were cramping from the cold, her hands numb inside her gloves. The rifle across her back felt heavier than it should have, not physically, but in some other way that she couldn't name. 7 confirmed kills, 150 total. Now, the number felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. The compound was chaos when she returned. Medics moving between bodies, soldiers securing the perimeter, fire crews dousing the burning Humvee. Someone had gotten the backup radio working. She could hear the chatter of voices, the coordinated calm of emergency response. David found her by the supply shed. His face was a mask of emotion she couldn't read. Shock, relief, fear, love, confusion, all of them fighting for dominance. Cat. His voice cracked on the syllable. What? Who? Inside, she said. We need to talk. They went to his office. The command trailer was destroyed, so they used the backup communications room in the mess hall. Catherine sat on a folding chair with a rifle across her knees, and David stood opposite her, his hands shaking a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Tell me, he said. Tell me everything. So she did. She told him about enlisting at 19, about the recruiter who'd noticed something in her eyes that she hadn't known was there. She told him about SOI, about basic sniper training, about the day she put 5 rounds into a 6-inch circle at 800 yards, and the instructor had looked at her like she was something dangerous. She told him about Afghanistan, about the mountains and the waiting and the terrible clarity that came when she settled behind her scope. She told him about her first confirmed kill, a fighter planting an IED on a road that would have killed an entire convoy, and the way she felt afterward. Not guilty, not proud, just empty. She told him about the numbers. 143. How each one was a person, a life, a story that ended because she'd done her job. How she'd trained herself not to think about the faces, the families, the futures that she'd stolen with every squeeze of the trigger. And she told him about Fallujah, the man in the doorway, the daughter pressed against his chest. 812 yards of perfect certainty. And she couldn't take the shot. 17 dead, 43 wounded, 11 children. I left because I couldn't trust myself anymore, she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. Everything about her was steady because she'd learned a long time ago that steadiness was survival. I couldn't tell if I was a soldier doing her duty or a monster who'd found a legal way to kill. And the only way I could think to answer that question was to stop, to walk away, to become someone else. David was silent for a long moment. His face was pale, his eyes wet with tears he wasn't shedding. 8 years, he said finally. 8 years, Kat. We've been married for 8 years, and you couldn't. I was afraid. The words tasted like ash. I was afraid that if you knew, you'd look at me the way everyone else looked at me. Like a weapon, like something to be pointed and fired and put away when the killing was done. I would never. I know you wouldn't, but the fear was still there. And every year it got harder to tell you, because every year was another year of lies, another layer of the person I pretended to be. David sank into the chair opposite her. He looked like a man who'd been hit by something he couldn't see, not angry, not betrayed, just broken open in ways he didn't have words for. The way you moved through this base, he said slowly, the way you noticed everything, the questions you asked about the comms, the sensors, the perimeter, you knew something was coming. I suspected. The regional intelligence was showing patterns I recognized from before, coordinated movement, professional tactics. I moved my trip up because I was afraid this base was being targeted. And you didn't tell me. I didn't know for certain. And I didn't. She stopped, swallowed. I didn't want to blow my cover. Even to save your life. Some part of me didn't want you to know. David laughed. It was not a happy sound. You know what's insane? I'm sitting here, listening to my wife tell me she's killed over 100 people. And the thing that hurts the most is that you didn't trust me. That you thought I would look at you differently. Would you? The question hung in the air between them. David ran his hands through his hair. I don't know. I need time to process this, to understand who you really are. I understand. Do you? He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his eyes shifted. Because I think maybe you spent so long running from who you are that you don't understand either. You told me you left the Corps because you were afraid of becoming a monster. But you just climbed a frozen ridge in the middle of an assault and killed 7 people with the kind of precision that takes years to develop. You did that to save us. To save me. Does a monster do that? Catherine didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. The medevac birds arrived 2 hours later. 2 CH-47 Chinooks that materialized out of clearing sky like angels with rotors. The wounded were loaded first. 3 Kia, 7 WI, 2 of them critical. Sergeant Morrison went on the second bird, his broken arm splinted, his eyes finding Catherine's through the swirl of snow and rotor wash. He nodded at her. She nodded back. Nothing more needed to be said. The investigation began immediately. Military police from the regional headquarters. Intelligence officers who asked questions with the careful precision of people who already knew the answers. A colonel who looked at Catherine with something that might have been suspicion or might have been respect. She told them everything. Her service record. Her specialty. The decision she'd made on the South Ridge. The shots she'd taken. The lives she'd ended. She answered every question with the flat effect of someone who had practiced this conversation in her nightmares for 8 years. When it was over, the colonel leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. Staff Sergeant Hayes, he said, using a rank she hadn't heard in almost a decade. Are you aware that your actions today saved the lives of 23 American soldiers? Yes, sir. Are you aware that we've been tracking the cell that conducted this assault for 6 months? That the men you killed were part of a network responsible for 18 attacks on coalition forces in this region? No, sir. I wasn't aware of that. You weren't aware. The colonel's eyes narrowed. And yet you somehow knew this base was being targeted. You somehow positioned yourself to respond to a threat that our intelligence assets had failed to identify. I got lucky, sir. Luck. The colonel smiled. It was not a kind smile. In my experience, Staff Sergeant, what looks like luck is usually preparation meeting opportunity. You prepared. The opportunity arrived. And 23 people are alive because of it. He stood up, straightened his uniform, and moved toward the door. There will be a formal inquiry. Protocols will be reviewed. Procedures will be examined. But off the record, he paused with his hand on the doorknob. Welcome back, Ghost. The door closed behind him. Catherine sat alone in the empty room, staring at her hands. 150 confirmed kills. 23 soldiers saved. 1 marriage fractured. She wondered if the math would ever balance. David found her that evening, sitting on the cot in the officer's quarters, the rifle lying across a footlocker in front of her. The sun was setting through the shattered windows of the compound, painting everything in shades of orange and red. "The brass wants to give you a medal," he said from the doorway. "Some kind of civilian commendation for valor." "I don't want a medal." "I know." He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. "I told him you'd say that." Silence stretched between them. Catherine could hear the distant sound of generators humming, of soldiers beginning the long work of rebuilding what had been destroyed. "I've been thinking," David said finally, "about what you said, about who you are and who you were trying to be." Catherine looked up at him. His face was still pale, still worn, but something had shifted in his eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something that might eventually become understanding. "I'm not going to pretend this doesn't change things," he continued, "because it does. You lied to me for 8 years, Kat. You built a life with me on a foundation of secrets, and I need time to figure out what that means. I know, but I also saw you today. I saw you climb that ridge and do something that nobody else on this base could have done. I saw you save my life and the lives of my soldiers, and I can't." His voice cracked. "I can't pretend that doesn't matter." Catherine stood up. She crossed the room and took his hands in hers. "I love you," she said. "I've loved you since the day we met. And every lie I told you, every secret I kept, it wasn't because I didn't trust you. It was because I didn't trust myself. I don't know who I'm going to be after this. I don't know if I can go back to being Catherine the civilian, the woman who gardens and cooks and pretends the past never happened. But I know I want to figure out with you if you'll let me." David was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he pulled her into his arms. "I need time," he whispered against her hair. "But I'm not going anywhere." They stood like that until the sun finished setting and the compound fell into darkness. Outside, the reconstruction continued. Soldiers clearing debris, engineers assessing damage, the endless work of putting a broken thing back together. Catherine stayed at FOB Granite for 3 more days. She helped where she could, organized the supplies, assisting the medics, teaching a young private how to properly calibrate a radio antenna that had been damaged in the assault. She didn't touch the rifle again. It sat in the supply shed, wrapped in a blanket, waiting for her to decide what to do with it. On the second day, Corporal Jenkins found her near the motor pool. His arm was in a sling. He'd been hit by shrapnel during the assault, but his eyes were clear and his smile was genuine. Staff Sergeant, he stumbled over the words, his young face flushing with embarrassment. "Catherine is fine." "Catherine." He nodded. "I just want to say, all of us want to say, thank you for what you did. We'd be dead without you." "I'd be dead." "You don't have to thank me." "Yeah, I do." He straightened up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "My girlfriend, the one I told you about, back in Ohio, she's pregnant. Just found out last week. I haven't told anyone yet, but I wanted you to know. Because of you, I'm going to be a father. Because of what you did." Catherine looked at him, this boy who would be a father, with his eager eyes and his damaged shoulder and his whole life stretching out before him, and felt something shift in her chest. "Congratulations," she said. Her voice was thick. "What are you going to name them?" "Don't know yet. But if it's a girl," he paused, smiled. "We're thinking Catherine." After he left, Catherine walked to the perimeter and stood at the gap in the fence where she'd slipped through 3 days ago. The snow was falling again, soft and quiet, covering the evidence of what had happened here. 7 confirmed kills, 1 miss, 23 lives saved, 1 baby named Catherine who would never know why. Was this the answer to the question she'd been asking for 8 years? Was this the moment where the math finally balanced, where the weights on either side of the scale came even? She didn't know. She suspected she never would. But for the first time in a long time, the not knowing didn't feel like failure. It felt like living. On the morning of the 3rd day, Catherine packed her truck. David walked her to the gate, his hand in hers, their breath clouding together in the frozen air. "Call me when you get home," he said. "I will. And Kat," he hesitated, "don't disappear on me. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you're thinking, just talk to me. Let me in. I'll try." He kissed her, a long, slow kiss that tasted like coffee and cold, and 8 years of love that had somehow survived the truth. Then she climbed into the truck, started the engine, and drove away. The road stretched out before her, empty and white and endless. The mountains rose on either side, their peaks lost in clouds. The radio played static, no signal this far from anywhere. So Catherine drove in silence, alone with her thoughts. In the back seat, wrapped in the same blanket she'd used to cover it, was the M110. She'd taken it with her when she left, the official paperwork citing temporary possession for investigation purposes. Nobody had questioned the lie. Nobody had wanted to. She drove for 6 hours. The past was clear this time, the blizzard having moved on to torture someone else's world. By the time she reached the highway, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Catherine pulled over to a rest stop and sat in the truck, watching the last light fade. 7 confirmed kills, 150 total, 23 soldiers saved, 1 marriage wounded but breathing. She thought about Jenkins and his unborn daughter. She thought about Morrison and his broken arm. She thought about David, alone at FOB Granite, waiting for her to become someone he could recognize again. And she thought about the man in Fallujah, the daughter pressed against his chest, the shot she hadn't taken. 17 dead. That was the cost of mercy. 17 innocents who'd still be alive if she'd been willing to kill a man in front of his child. But today she'd killed 7 men and saved 23. The math was different. The weight on the scales had shifted. Did that mean she'd been wrong in Fallujah? That mercy was a weakness she couldn't afford? Or did it mean that every situation was different, every choice its own universe of consequence, and the only thing she could do was make the call and live with what came after? She didn't know. She started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. The rifle sat in her trunk like a question she couldn't answer. Every mile she drove, she felt his weight behind her, not physical, but existential. The same weight she felt for 8 years, the same pressure that had never really gone away. She'd told herself a story. For 8 years, she'd told herself that Catherine the sniper was dead, that she'd killed that part of herself in Germany when she'd signed the resignation papers. She'd built a new identity on top of the old one, layer by layer, until she almost believed it was real. But the ridge had proved the story was a lie. She hadn't hesitated, not for a single moment. When the assault began, when the bullets started flying, she hadn't thought about the life she'd built or the woman she pretended to be. She'd simply become. The sniper had emerged from wherever she'd been hiding, and the transition had been so seamless, so effortless, that Catherine hadn't even noticed it happening. 7 confirmed kills, 1 miss, acceptable ratio by her own clinical assessment. That was the part that scared her most. Not the killing. She'd made her peace with the killing a long time ago, in the mountains of Afghanistan, in the ruins of Fallujah. What scared her was the absence of hesitation, the way her hands had moved without thought, the way her eye had found the scope with perfect muscle memory, the way the math had scrolled through her mind like she'd never stopped solving those equations. She hadn't suppressed the sniper. She'd just covered her up, put her in a box and shoved that box into a corner, and pretended it didn't exist. But the sniper was still there, would always be there. Because the sniper wasn't a different person, wasn't a mask Catherine had worn and then removed. The sniper was Catherine, had always been Catherine, would always be Catherine. The civilian life was the role. The gardening, the cooking, the throw pillows and the Sunday brunches, those were the performance. The truth was a rifle in her trunk, the calculator in her head, the steady hands that had never learned to shake. The highway stretched on, endless and dark, the headlights carving a tunnel through the night. Catherine drove without music, without distraction, letting the thoughts move through her like weather. She thought about David, about the look on his face when she told him the truth. Not betrayal, exactly, or not just betrayal. Something more complicated, something that might have been grief. He'd married a woman he thought he knew. He'd built 8 years of memories with a version of her that had never existed. And now he had to figure out whether he could love the real version, the one with blood on her hands and calculations in her head, and a past she could never fully explain. She hoped he could. She needed him to, because without David, without the life they'd built together, she wasn't sure what would be left. Just the sniper, just the calculations, just 150 ghosts whispering in her ear every time she closed her eyes. The rest stop appeared out of the darkness, a cluster of buildings and parking spaces, and a few weary travelers sleeping in their cars. Catherine pulled into a spot at the far end of the lot and killed the engine. For a long time, she sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Then she got out of the truck, walked around to the back, and opened the trunk. The rifle was there, wrapped in a blanket, patient as a sleeping child. She reached in and touched it, felt the cold metal through the fabric, the weight and balance of something that had been designed for a single purpose. She could get rid of it, drop it in a lake somewhere, bury it in the woods, hand it over to the MPs when she got home and never think about it again. But she knew she wouldn't, because the rifle wasn't the problem. The rifle was just a tool, a piece of machinery that didn't mean anything without the hands that held it. The problem was her, would always be her. Catherine closed the trunk and walked into the rest stop. She bought a cup of coffee from a machine that hummed with mechanical indifference, and she sat at a plastic table near the window, watching the trucks roll past on the highway. She was still running tactical replays in her mind. 7 confirmed. 1 miss. First target at 612 yards. Second at 618. Third at 622. Windage adjusted for each shot. Elevation compensated for the dropping barometric pressure. 9 rounds total. For second between shots on average. Acceptable ratio. Clean performance. The kind of shooting that would have earned her a commendation in her old life. A story told in whispers at Stone Bay where the next generation of snipers learned their craft. But that wasn't her life anymore. Hadn't been for 8 years. Wouldn't be again. She'd made that choice in Germany. Made it again every morning when she woke up next to David and pretended to be someone else. Except she hadn't been pretending. That was the thing she was only now beginning to understand. The woman who gardened and cooked and worried about throw pillows. That woman was real. She wasn't performance or a mask or a lie. She was Catherine Hayes, just as much as the sniper was Catherine Hayes. The two versions weren't in conflict. They were the same person, living the same life, carrying the same weight. The sniper and the civilian, the killer and the wife, the ghost and the gardener, all of them were true. All of them were her. She finished her coffee and walked back to the truck. The rifle was still waiting in the trunk, patient and silent. She looked at it for a long moment, then closed the lid and climbed back into the driver's seat. The highway stretched on. The night deepened. And Catherine Hayes drove toward home, carrying her ghost with her, understanding at last that she would never be free of them. But maybe freedom wasn't the point. Maybe the point was learning to live with what you were, with what you'd done, with what you were capable of doing again if the situation demanded it. Maybe the point was accepting that some questions didn't have answers, that some weights never balanced, that the math of killing would never add up to anything clean. Catherine's story shows us that identity isn't something we build. It's something we discover, often in moments we never choose. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments, if you had Catherine's past, would you have revealed it to save others or protected your secret? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. See you in the next one. She'd spent 8 years grieving a version of herself she thought she'd lost. But the truth was simpler and more brutal than that. She'd never lost a sniper. She'd just stopped admitting she was there. The sunrise found her on the highway, still driving, still thinking, still carrying the weight of 150 ghosts. The rifle in the trunk, the ring on her finger, the calculator in her head, running numbers. She would never be able to stop calculating. 7 confirmed. 1 miss. 23 saved. 1 marriage fracturing, but not broken. Catherine Hayes watched the sun climb over the mountains and understood, finally, that this was who she was. Not the civilian, not the sniper, not the ghost or the gardener or the wife. All of them. None of them. Something in between that didn't have a name. She drove on, into the morning, into whatever came next. The rifle stayed in the trunk, but her hands remembered exactly how to hold it.